Don't you love the energy? Don't you love the energy? On this All Saints Sunday, I'm reminded of an old dog roll that goes like this. Living above with saints we love, that will be grace and glory. Living below with saints we know, that is a different story. I suppose some days, it can be like that, right? Living with one another, we bump up against, one another's edges, and sometimes those edges are sharp. But more than any other day of the year, today is what I like to call Family Reunion Day. It's Family Reunion Day for the church. On All Saints Sunday, we get to pull out old family photograph albums. And it's a chance for us to remember, as the people of God, where we've come from. On All Saints Sunday, we open up the pages, and we no doubt see some faces that take us back. Some might embarrass us, like an old eccentric aunt. Others might tickle a funny bone, or produce a deep sigh, or maybe even cause a tear to well up in our eye. Jesus describes them, I think, beautifully in the Beatitudes. Turn back the pages and you'll find old St. Francis. Poor in spirit, standing barefoot in the snow with birds on his shoulders and his pet wolf. His pet wolf there by his side. Turn another page and there's St. Joan of Arc, hungering and thirsting for righteousness. She took on men twice her size in battle. She preferred armor to petticoats. And she confounded everyone by dressing like a man. But the voices of her critics were nothing compared to the voice of God that spoke in her head. Turn another page, and there are those who are persecuted for the faith. Saint Ursula and her friends, her companions. They were put to death, massacred by the Huns outside the city of Cologne in the 4th century. Killed for no other reason than the fact that they were Christians. If you keep turning the pages, you'll come across a man of meekness. St. James the Just, brother of Jesus. It was said that he spent so much time on his knees in prayer that he was nicknamed Old Camel Knees. When you start flipping through the pages, you notice there's one thing that all of these saints seem to have in common, and that is that they were not, saints. Legend has it that St. Francis used to roll around naked in the snow in order to defend himself from his lusty thoughts. There's St. Mary of Egypt. 17 years she lived as a prostitute. She was converted to the faith, and for the next 50 years she became a desert hermit, living a life of poverty and faith. You remember, according to the book of Acts, St. Paul himself admits that early on he threw Christians into prison. He even put some of them to death. And Peter, St. Peter, remember the first time Jesus encountered him by the boats there, mending the nets by the Sea of Galilee. And Peter was so ashamed, so aware of the darkness of his own heart, he said, Lord, boy, if you only knew me, you wouldn't want me to follow you. And he tried to run away. Generally speaking, saints are not distinguished by their goodness. If you read your history, saints are not so much distinguished by their goodness as they are by their love for God. A love that shines brighter than anything else about them. Frederick Buechner, one of my favorite authors, he put it this way. He said, in his holy flirtation with the world, God occasionally drops a handkerchief. These handkerchiefs are called saints. What that tells me is that the production of saints is more about, it's more about God's business than our own. But either way, the main thing is that they really do exist. There really are ordinary men and women whose love for God has caused them to do some really extraordinary things. Which means, my sisters and brothers, that none of us can shrug our shoulders and say that sainthood is beyond us. Take Absalom Jones, for instance. You know about Absalom Jones? Absalom Jones was a house slave in Delaware, born in 1746. He taught himself to read by going through the New Testament. And eventually, he was sold to a shopkeeper in Philadelphia. There he went to night school that was run by the Quakers. He married another slave whose freedom he bought with his meager earnings, his savings from the shop. 18 years later, he was able to do the same thing for himself, and he became a lay minister for black members at St. George's Methodist Episcopal Church there in Philadelphia. He did such a good job sharing the love of Christ, bringing in new people, especially Negroes, those from Africa, that the church council got alarmed because the church was growing so fast. And so in a secret meeting, they voted that they would have all the black members of the church. They wanted them out of sight, so they would put them, they said, we're going to put them up in the balcony, right, where no one else can see them. Nobody told Absalom Jones. And the next Sunday, when the usher tried to pry Jones out of his pew and move him upstairs, Jones got up, and all the blacks in church got up, and they all walked out. No one had told Absalom Jones that Jesus didn't want him in church. So he started his own church. And 7 years later, his congregation was admitted to the Diocese of Pennsylvania as St. Thomas African Episcopal Church. Grew to more than 500 members that first year. And in 1804, Absalom Jones was ordained a pastor. A pastor in Christ's one holy, Catholic, and apostolic church. Or consider a woman by the name of Constance. Think about Constance and her merciful companions, a group of nuns from New England who moved to Memphis, Tennessee. They had only been there a short time when yellow fever broke out, spread throughout the city. More than half the people who lived in Memphis packed their bags and they headed out of town. But Constance and her compassionate companions stayed put. They soothed the dying with their Yankee accents. They put cold rags on fever-hot foreheads, emptied bedpans full of contagion. And before the fever had passed, Constance and all of her companions were killed by the fever. Now, maybe they thought that God would protect them from the illness, or maybe they weren't even thinking about themselves at all. In either case, if you look for it, you can find there's a round marker with the names of all of Constance and her companions, all their names there in Elmwood Cemetery in Memphis, Tennessee. Now, having said that, I also have to remind myself that one of the mistakes that I easily make is that sometimes I give the impression that saints are those who have died. Unfortunately, that's one of the requirements for canonization in the Roman Catholic Church. But if you look around, there are saints all over the place. Think about those who have suffered for righteousness. like a Nelson Mandela, or peacemakers, like Desmond Tutu, or the pure in heart, like Osceola McCarty from Hattiesburg, Mississippi. You ever heard about Osceola McCarty? Anybody? Nobody? Oh. Almost no one in Hattiesburg, Mississippi had heard about Osceola McCarty until just a couple of years before she died. She didn't look like a saint. She was just a laundress. An old black woman who had never married, who dropped out of school when she was in the 6th grade, and she began at that point a lifetime of washing clothes. It was in 6th grade that her maiden aunt came out of the hospital, couldn't walk, and had moved in with Osceola's family so they could take care of her. 12-year-old Osceola McCarty left school to care for her aunt and to help her mother and her grandmother with the backyard laundry business. At the end of the year, when her aunt was better, Osceola thought that she was too far behind to return to school. "I was too big," she says, "so I didn't go back." For the next 75 years, she did the laundry. Scrubbing dark clothes with a washboard, boiling the whites in a big black kettle in the backyard, hanging the clothes up on a wash line. Her day started when the sun came up, and it ended when the sun went down. When she was 87 years old, it wasn't until then that people knew who she really was. When she turned 87, she gave $150,000, her life savings. She gave it to the University of Southern Mississippi for black scholarships. And suddenly photographers and newspaper reporters, everywhere, they were all over, wanting to hear the story. Local business people pledged to give matching gifts. And the first young woman to be awarded a McCarty scholarship adopted Osceola as her honorary grandmother. McCarty says the one question she gets asked more than any other is this one: why didn't you spend the money on yourself? Why did you spend the money on yourself? And with a twinkle in her eye, she says, "Oh, but I am. But I am." On All Saints' Day, we make this bold claim that all of these people that I've just been talking about, all these people are our relatives. In the words of an old hymn, they were all of them saints of God, and I mean God helping to be one too. We have the same blood running through our veins, Christ's blood. And the same light that we see shining in them shines in us. One of the reasons that we lift up and name all these folks, young and old, right? You see the list in your bulletin of all the saints on one side that have gone into the kingdom triumphant in this past year. And if you turn it over, we list all the folks who have been baptized this past year. Do you know why we do that? So that the newly baptized might have a chance to get to know this part of their family. Get to know their ancestors. Because to be a saint, first and foremost, means that we belong to the family of God. In baptism, we are given a gift that can never be taken away. We're marked forever. Once you're baptized, you belong to God. And all that remains to be seen is what you're going to do with the gift that you've been given. It doesn't matter whether or not you're famous or perfect. Goodness, you don't even have to be dead. You just have to be you. The one of a kind, never to be replicated or duplicated, you. Be who God has created you to be. to love as you've been loved, to forgive as you've been forgiven, to throw your arms around the world, to let your light shine. And you don't have to do it alone either. You have all this company. All these folks, saints above and saints below. Folks sitting around you right here this morning. Folks that you can see for yourself, plus all the folks that you can't see. Folks like Francis and Joan and Mary of Egypt and Ursula and James the Just and Absalom Jones and Constance and Desmond Tutu and Osceola McCarty. Can you see them? Can you see them there, egging you on, calling your name, shouting themselves hoarse with encouragement? You are a part of them, and they are a part of you. And together we make up the communion of saints, God's handkerchiefs dropped on the world for the love of Christ. That's who you are. And you know what I say about that? Thanks be to God. Amen.